Welcome to The Breach Show, featuring sharp analysis on politics and social movements in Canada. I'm your host, Desmond Cole. The ongoing war in Sudan has escalated in recent weeks as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, a powerful paramilitary group, has strengthened its position in North Darfur, in the western part of Sudan. The RSF has engaged in civilian massacres in this region, and they've been using weapons made in Canada. As war has raged on for over 2 years, Canada's complicity in bloodshed has led to condemnations and, recently, hearings at the Canadian Senate, but very little action. Will Canada take accountability for its role in a war that has claimed up to 400,000 lives? Will the government stop sending weapons that end up in Sudan and accept more refugees from that country? Joining me to speak about all of this today is Ismail Adam, the president of the Darfur Association of Canada, and Nisrin Elamin, assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Toronto and a co-founder of the Sudan Solidarity Collective. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for being here. Ismail, I'd like to begin with you, please. Could you help us to understand the significance of the RSF gaining ground against the Sudanese armed forces in Darfur and what it means for the civilian population that is still trapped inside that area?
Just let me give you a little bit more background. So the RSF, it has been, is known to be the Janjaweed. They have committed all the atrocities and the genocide in early 2000s, between 2003 and 2005. And they were used by the government in Sudan. At that time, it was Omar al-Bashir's regime. And at that time, like, it is estimated to have killed over 300,000 people and displaced over 2.5 million people, in which that even after the war stopped, um, up to date, there are about 2 million still living in IDP camps, and some camps like in the neighboring countries. So the RSF, um, it is known to have committed these crimes in Darfur, and they kept committing it. It is not the only the Al-Fashir now. 2 years, 3 years ago, they have also um, decimated like a city called the Junaina, and then neighboring cities called like Krindeng 1 and Krindeng 2. And the main thing for them is that they are after specifically areas that are rich in gold, like the area called Jebel Moon in the Krindeng near Junaina. They displaced, they killed so many people, they attacked and decimated that city for the simple goal just to drive the people out of it. So the RSF has all this history of perpetrating all these crimes in Darfur. And one of the main reasons that they kept doing this, because the lack of accountability and for them to act with impunity. This is what one of the main reasons that these type of atrocities they kept recurring. Like as I mentioned, 2000, early 2000s, and now it is that they get in the past backed by the military government, but now have they are becoming the proxies for like foreign governments that have interest in Sudan and in Darfur. And it is not only Al Fashir; it is just that Darfur is the like a huge region with 5 districts, and Al Fashir is the last district to fall in their hands. And they have done similar things in the other districts as well. And was Al Fashir was the last stronghold that was under siege for over 18 months until it fell. My own cousin died like 3 weeks ago in Al Fashir when a shell fell in their home. So a lot of people, like many thousands of people, have lost their lives, and many have fled the region. And the ones that left inside, they're kind of trapped inside, and some of them, sadly, feed themselves in animal feed if they can find it. So the starvation and famine is very rampant, and the diseases are, again, that's another way of people losing their lives. So it is really a dire situation now.
I'm very sorry to hear about the loss of your cousin. Nisreen, I'd like to ask you, we hear different descriptions about this war uh, between the RSF, as we've mentioned, and the Sudanese armed forces as being the two main groups who have been in conflict for the last more than 2 years now. And many describe this conflict between the two as a civil war, but others, including yourself, prefer to refer to this as a counter revolutionary war. Can you explain what it is that you mean by that?
I think it's important to understand that Sudan experienced a really powerful popular revolution in 2019 that overthrew the dictatorship of Umar al-Bashir after 30 years in power, the same dictatorship that essentially co-coordinated, right, the genocide that Ismail was just talking about in the early 2000s in Darfur, where the military and the Janjaweed at the time, now known as the RSF, kind of worked together to commit genocide. There was a transitional government after the revolution ousted al-Bashir. It was a power-sharing kind of government between civilian and military elites. The military elites being al-Burhan, the head of the army, and Hemeti, the head of the RSF. So they were in a kind of partnership transitional government, but power was always tilted in favor of military elites. And so during that transitional period, you saw efforts to kind of move closer towards democratic elections and civilian oversight, for example, over economic assets that these military elites control. And of course, the military elites were against that and ended up orchestrating a coup together in October of 2021. So the RSF and SAF essentially upended that process that was supposed to lead towards civilian rule and democratic elections by staging this coup. And it's in the aftermath of that coup that the UN led peace talks that really kind of centered and legitimized the coup leaders. Both Burhan and Hemeti are responsible for war crimes that span decades, kind of framing them as potential reformists rather than listening to people on the streets, including the resistance committees. There's about 8,000 of them across the country that really formed the backbone of the revolution. And these are like these kind of non hierarchical, consensus based collectives that have been not only organizing boycotts and strikes and protests against the military coup regime, but also providing people basic services in the absence of a kind of functional state. And so the resistance committees were really calling for no legitimacy, no partnership with the military, with the military. And of course, the UN peace talks did the opposite by kind of centering and legitimizing them. And I just want to also add to what Ismail was saying before. The Janjaweed became formalized as the RSF in 2013 by the al-Bashir regime. Al-Bashir was really trying to coup-proof his rule against the army, given Sudan's long history of military coups. So he thought, I'm going to create something that will protect me against a potential military coup. And it was further legitimized by the European Union through something called the Khartoum process, which was a kind of migratory control process whereby the EU has been trying to externalize its border to the border between Sudan and Libya and essentially paid the Bashir regime about $200 million to use the RSF as its border control. And the RSF has also been used to fight in the war on Yemen on the Saudi coalition's behalf. So all of this to say that in April of 2023, the military coup regime basically imploded and split in two, with each faction vying for kind of political and economic control of the country. And so for me, this is really an internationalized counter-revolutionary war that is meant to foreclose the possibility of civilian rule and popular democracy as has been articulated by the resistance committees. And it's internationalized because of the international backers of these two parties, right? On the one hand, you have the UAE supporting the RSF in exchange for gold. They're shipping in weapons. And on the other hand, you have the army being supported by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey. And, neither of these sides are interested in civilian rule, which is why I would call this a war against civilians rather than a civil war.
Thank you for that explanation. It's really helpful. Ismail, we know that Canadian weapons shipped to the United Arab Emirates have made their way into Sudan. We know about the strong relationship between the United Arab Emirates and the RSF, who trades gold and other resources for weapons. And we know about Canada's strong relationship with the United Arab Emirates. In fact, Mark Carney just visited the Emirates last week and announced a $70 billion trade agreement between the two countries. But he didn't say a word about Sudan. What do you make of his silence as the United Arab Emirates fuels the war in Sudan?
Canada is free to sign kind of trades, but human rights needs to be respected. It is the best, even for the best interest of Canada, not to have ties with, you know, with its own companies that reside here in Canada, have ties to a genocide or ethnic cleansing. That will just distort the image of Canada itself. So, as we probably have read, that there are multiple Canadian companies, manufacturers like the Sterling Cross, which like manufacture the rifles that seen carried by the RSF, and the Stride Group, which manufactures armored vehicles, also seen carrying RSF troops. Yet, like a country that is known to be peace building country, a country that one of the G7, a country that all like established democracy. I mean, not to tackle this issue and have governance around the arms that have been manufactured in Canada, I think that's a huge wrong, and I think that is really Canada should really look at this and set up trade, according to the Trade Act that we have, the export and import trade, they can tighten the screws around this. There are also some like a bill currently in flight. I think the Jenny Kwan's bill, although there's some controversy about the arm trades and stuff like that, but it closes the loophole of the re-export of arms, and I think it is necessary that these needs to be stopped, and Canada needs to provide like this oversight, this complicity, and it kills more people, and it's hurting us as like Sudanese families, because to like our people get killed by a sniper that is made in our second home, that is Canada. I think that's wrong and needs to stop.
Nisrin, uh, you spoke at a recent Senate committee hearing yourself about Canada's role in the violence in Sudan, and you listed several demands, one of which was an immediate arms embargo on Canadian weapons that are likely to make it to Sudan, particularly through the United Arab Emirates. How was that message received by the Senate committee that you spoke to?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of how the message was received in the Senate, I wanted to just mention that part of why people were listening was because, one of the members of our Sudan Solidarity Collective, Shahad Al Faki, broke the story alongside a couple of other journalists in CBC that Sterling Cross rifles, Canadian Sterling Cross rifles, are being used. And so, obviously, now that that information is public, the Canadian government feels the need to address this. And part of their concern was legal complicity, right? Can we be held accountable for these weapons ending up being used in an ethnic cleansing campaign against indigenous communities in Darfur?
Yeah, we heard that question being asked by one of the senators, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where that motivation is coming from, which, the straight armored vehicle story was, I think, was broke like maybe a year or two ago. I mean, this has long been a sort of like we as the Sudanese community have known this for a long time. I think it's happening. The one of the things that was really instrumental about that story is that it broke just as things were escalating in Darfur, and there was kind of media attention on it. There's been a virtual media blackout on kind of what's happening in Sudan, partly due to anti-black racism, but also because the allies in this case, the UAE is one of Canada's largest trading partners, and like Ismail was saying, they Canada's prioritizing that relationship, and also I should say the Abrams Accord, right? This kind of normalization with Israel accords over the lives of Sudanese civilians. And that's a shame. I mean, it's something that needs to get further exposed. I don't believe that a settler colonial government will do what's best without pressure, right? We need the Canadian public, including Sudanese Canadians, but also non-Sudanese, to apply that pressure to say Canada can actually stop its complicity in this genocide in Darfur and in the broader war in Sudan.
There's always, the profit will be the guiding force behind these companies, and unless there is, like a framework that clearly governs all the trade deals, especially the arms, this is not going to stop, and the greed will not, stop. People will still sell these arms to the UAE. UAE is not directly actually sending these arms, but they use third parties. They purchase these from Canada and they use third parties to funnel these arms inside the Sudan in exchange for the gold and some other. They have huge investment in Sudan, like agriculturally and all that type of things. I mean, the gold in the Dubai exchange, they don't have a single mine in the UAE. All this gold is smuggled from Sudan. So they have vested interest in this, like maintaining the status quo. And we also said to them, Canada, if they sign this $70 billion trade, that is a huge amount of trade. Canada can use its influence and position in the world to exert some pressure on the UAE to stop arming the RSF and the Janjaweed.
And I just wanted to mention the Loophole Act. I think it's a Bill C-233, closing that loophole, right? Which would essentially mean that Canadian weapons can't uh, currently they're going through the United States to the UAE and elsewhere, and that allows Canadian weapons to end up in places like Sudan, where Canada has an established kind of arms embargo against the country, right? Like so that loophole kind of allows those flows. That loophole also allows the flow of weapons from Canada to Israel. So in both cases, both genocides, you're seeing a need for this loophole to be closed so that Canada isn't complicit in these atrocities. Yeah.
Ismail, you have been advocating long before 2023 in April for Canada to receive many more refugees from Sudan than it currently does. What is the current state of asylum seeking for Sudanese people fleeing violence and also famine, as you mentioned?
There are some very limited number of people that can seek asylum because it is not easy to come over here to seek asylum. But Canada has established a pathway. In 2024, and that is they started with 3,250 applications, and they ramped it up to 5,000 applications. This is a reunification pathway for people fled the war or affected by the war in Sudan, the war that got erupted in 2023, to come over and reunited with their families here in Canada. And so far, this is like estimated that about 10,000, these 5,000 applications supposed to bring about 10,000 Sudanese. So out of these 2,000, out of these 10,000, only 2,200 have currently arrived in Canada. So a little less than a quarter of these people, almost nearly 2 years, because this program started in February of 2024. There are a lot of bureaucracies, and there is delays. There is myriad of issues. Are uh, preventing from preventing this from getting expedited. And we've been asking all the time, all along. Previous Minister Miller mentioned in one of these televised interviews that 2025, by the end of it, probably the majority of these people will come in. As we know, Miller is no longer the minister, and the app now is in the new government is the minister, and people are having kind of difficulty even meeting the minister. So we don't really know what is going to happen. And then there is the new plan level, that 26, 28, which you know limits the number of people under humanitarian programs, and this is going to pose a huge issue. And these people, here in Canada, anxiously waiting to see a loved one. And many people have lost their lives who are waiting in this, to come over to Canada.
Thank you for that clarification. Nisreen, I mentioned that you work with and are a co-founder of the Sudanese Solidarity Collective. Its work includes a lot of support for what are called emergency response rooms within Sudan. And these are locally run support networks that differ from international aid organizations. So, what are these emergency response rooms, and why does your collective specifically support their work?
Thank you for that question. I mean, I should also say that the Sudan Solidarity Collective actually works in partnership with the Darfur Diaspora Association, and we're very grateful to the support that Ismail and Ustaz Mahdoub have given us to be able to funnel, I think now we've raised about $1 million for these groups, mostly from small donors, giving us $10, $20, $75 a month. And so, yeah, these emergency response rooms emerged out of the network of resistance committees that I described earlier. There's about 700 of them across the country, although some of them have also had to shut down because of USAID cuts and other kinds of the kind of catastrophe of the war. And essentially, they're led by volunteers. They coordinate communal kitchens, they evacuate people from dangerous areas, turn defunct schools into shelters, drive ambulances, organize emergency health clinics, rape crisis centers. They've been burying and retrieving dead bodies. In some cases, they're organizing learning activities and psychosocial support for survivors of sexual violence. I mean, really, they are, in my view, running a country in the absence of a functional state. It's really thanks to them that a lot of our relatives have been able to survive and get some form of healthcare, as the healthcare system has mostly collapsed, and also food. These communal kitchens are probably the cornerstone of their work. I was in Sudan when the war broke out, and I noticed that people immediately pivoted from the kind of political mobilization and organizing against the military coup regime towards emergency response work. And so I think them taking that role has been really critical, but it also means that it's taken away from the kind of more long-term political organizing towards, popular democracy and a kind of more revolutionary vision for Sudan. But yeah, I think, these mutual aid groups are doing incredible work on the ground. We also support a farmers alliance that has been supporting about 2,400 farmers in the agricultural Jazeera region to grow food, which allows them to not only feed themselves and others, but also to remain on land that elites have been kind of eyeing for quite a while. Sudan has been kind of a cornerstone of the UAE's plan to expand its regional power across the Horn of Africa. They've acquired ports across the Horn of Africa. They have established lots of agricultural, like agribusiness farms, because they don't have much arable land or sweet water. So I think we have to really think of the role of the UAE as a kind of emerging imperial formation. They, along with the Saudis, invested about $27 billion in Sudanese land infrastructure and ports before the war began, and actually controlled more Sudanese land than all of Sudan's large domestic investors combined. And what that does is it basically displaces people off of their land and livelihoods, and it puts a lot of small farmers and herders out of business. They're mostly producing animal feed to kind of boost their dairy and meat industry, and then they dump those products back onto rural and urban markets across the Horn of Africa. And, in undermining rural people's livelihoods, they then become the RSF and to some extent also the army's most willing recruits, right? There's a link there between land dispossession, the undermining of rural livelihoods, and the expansion of the militarized state, right? Because they get used essentially as foot soldiers for these violent counterinsurgency campaigns. And I think that is something that we have to kind of keep in mind as well.
In researching for this episode, I read that the food aid that was coming through USAID and the World Food Program constituted about 60% of food aid that was previously going into Sudan. So it's a catastrophic loss that has to be made up by these other support networks. It's been more than 2 decades now that Canadian oil and mining companies, we talked about weapons, but Canadian oil and mining companies have also been exploiting resources in Sudan in partnership with local powers. What is the impact that those mining and oil exploration activities have been having on the local Sudanese population?
Well, this is one of the things I noticed in the Senate hearing. One of the senators said something to the effect of, well, we're one of, I don't know, 196 countries or however many countries there are in the world. Why should we be the ones to play any kind of role here? There's plenty of other countries that can step in. And I had to remind the senator that Canada has long been complicit in fueling state violence in Sudan, starting in the late 1990s at the sort of height of the civil war or war against the South, in which over its two phases, I mean, the first phase was from 1955 to 1972. The second phase, started in the early 80s until 2005, until the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. And then in 2011, South Sudanese voted to become independent. But it was really at the height of the civil war against the South that companies like the London Group, right, which is Swedish owned but functions through a consortium of Canadian entities and has a base here in Canada, but also Talisman Energy, both oil companies that essentially paid the Bashir regime to clear oil fields. So what does that mean? They knew fully what they knew full, were fully aware that by funding the Bashir regime to clear oil fields, this meant that they were funding them to forcibly displace people, to attack civilians and burn down villages, right? I mean, it really kind of escalated violence during that time, and that support went until about 2003, which was the beginning of the genocide in Darfur. So I think, as Canadians, right, we need to take responsibility for that history. There's an opportunity here to right that wrong and to do something positive here, which is why we've been calling for an arms embargo not only on Sudan but on those fueling the war, which in this case with the RSF is the UAE, because there is no direct link given the long-standing sanctions regime against Sudan that started during the Clinton era. You don't see as many direct links, but you see that indirect link through the UAE. Canada is complicit through the UAE essentially at the moment, right?
You've both mentioned, I think, Bill C-233, currently before Parliament, introduced by Jenny Kwan of the NDP. This bill aims to. I'm gonna quote from a piece that you two and Robin Maynard have contributed for us at the Breach. That the bill aims to, quote, close the loophole that allows arms exports to the U.S. to bypass review, enabling the U.S. to divert Canadian weapons to the UAE, unquote. So, Ismail, how can people who support this bill push to see it passed through Parliament? We have a minority Parliament right now. This is not being introduced by the governing Liberals. It's being done by Jenny Kwan and the opposition NDP. How can we push to see this bill through to its passage?
I think highlighting on the loophole itself, and that will continue to tarnish the image of Canada as its own companies are, are sending the arms through that loophole to Sudan, which is committing atrocities that it is a stain on it is very shameful that Canada can allow this to continue. And the only thing that Canada can do to stop that, is to have some sort of support to this bill. But I think overall, If that can be done, I think supporting this bill will be, um, you know, um, the solution for for Canadian manufacturer, like arm manufacturers or equipment manufacturers, not to have their products being used to kill people, and because that is, that's part of the complicity that um, Nasrin was talking about. Is just that. I mean, I call it is the willful blindness. Like your stuff going to do something on the other side, but you choose not to do anything. So you are complicit in that, and that's supposed to be there's some kind of consequences to this type of behavior. I think so. From that perspective, I'm not sure if Nasrin can add to this. I think it is very important to for Jenny Kwan's bill to find the support that it needs so that it can pass to close these loopholes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add is that I think it's very important to also center Palestine in this to make sure that that doesn't get removed from the kind of loophole bill. In that, like, I would hate to see them say, okay, we will close the loophole in regards to Sudan, but not in regards to Israel, Palestine, right? So I think that that is key. I think the language needs to be around, uh, current atrocities and genocides, and yeah, and just make sure that sort of Palestinians don't get thrown under the bus as a result of whatever compromise comes out of this. Yeah.
The parallels between how arms are able to flow from Canada to each of these two regions are really, really striking, actually. When it comes to our policies of immigration in this country, we know that the Carney government has been actually moving to really clamp down on people being able to come into this country, whether that be as um, permanent residents, whether that be as refugee claimants, asylum seekers. It seems to be that Carney is moving very decidedly away from Justin Trudeau in saying that we have to make it harder to get into this country. And so we're having this conversation about people needing asylum at a time where Canada is shutting its doors in many ways. And we also know that Canada's reputation and its record really on inviting particularly Black asylum seekers to this country is very poor. So, how are you appealing to government officials to reverse these trends so that it's possible for more Sudanese people to make their way here?
I mean, I think one of the ways is by really pointing out the anti-Black racism that is inherent in the Canadian immigration policies. I think it's the scale of the crisis, right? I mean, over 14 million people have been displaced by this war. It's the largest humanitarian and displacement crisis in the world, and Canada has played a negative role in it, as we can see right now with the weapons being used by the RSF to push people off of their land, to massacre them, etc., creating right flows of refugees and displaced people, whether it's across the border or internally. So I think for me, I think there's a perception, maybe that Canada and the United States are taking in huge numbers of refugees, which is absolutely not true. Sudan takes in more refugees than Canada ever has, right? Mostly, it's countries in the Middle East and Africa that have been taking in large numbers, in the millions sometimes, of refugees. By contrast, Canada's taking in a couple tens of thousands. I mean, it's really a drop in the bucket, given its complicity. So I think that is one of the things that I try to point out. Also, family reunification is a right for Canadian citizens, right? You should be able to bring your relative who is in Sudan at high risk of dying, right? Whether it's of disease or getting a missile, right, hitting their home, to Canada, to safety, right, to you. Everybody has that right, and so I always point out the discrepancy. I think right now Sudanese are being admitted at a 1 to 100 ratio in relation to Ukrainian refugees. Ukrainians, of course, absolutely deserve to come here. I fully support that. For Ukrainians, all the financial barriers were removed. The process was expedited, right? And so it's not only about the numbers; it's also about creating, removing the barriers to access.
I absolutely with second what Nisrin is saying, and one thing that I'm not sure if you're aware of, Desmond, is that they almost for Sudanese they almost like privatize the humanitarian kind of process because you either have enough for like your job actually your income supports this, or if not, you have to put almost $10,000 per person, put it in a trust fund, okay, until that person comes. So people actually did everything, sold their belongings or their cars or everything. They put the money in trust funds, sitting in the banks, and their loved ones, almost 2 years, are not coming. They don't even know now if they will, when they will come, and this is not right. Canada has accepted or adopted rather what they call the second international decade for people of African descent. This is coming from the UN, but Canada has adopted this last year, I think December of last year, and they can uphold themselves accountable to what they have adopted. And that is supposed to support all the Black people or people from Black origins, and Sudanese being part of that. They're supposed to help them, given the opportunity now, even just to save the lives of the people that we are Canadians living here in Canada, our own families dying in Sudan. We can't even bring our loved ones over here, despite with all that we've been doing. So Canada should hold themselves accountable to what they adopt, and I think that will add a lot of support to the families, including the Sudanese families.
I'd like to thank both of you for bringing your work and your expertise to our audience today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If you like what you've heard on The Breach Show, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to support our work, please become a sustaining member to help us produce more journalism for transformation. And you can do that by going to breachmedia.ca/support. Thanks for listening.